in Mexico City in graphic arts before moving to the United States and attending the Art Center in Pasadena. And then worked for many, many years as an illustrator before returning to graduate school, as I said recently, and just finishing in spring 2014 with an MFA at UCSB. She has exhibited her work at the Museum of Contemporary Art here in Santa Barbara, at Lotus Land, at Gallery Nucleus, and Santa Monica College. And she's been recognized for her illustration work from the American Illustration Society of Illustrators and the Society of Publication Designers. I ask you to join me in welcoming Maria here today. All right, so we can see the slides. Are you all?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So hi, everyone. It's nice to see so many familiar faces today, and even some people that came from San Francisco. So thank you all for coming. Before I start with slides, I would like to thank Sarah Cunningham for the opportunity to show my work at Atkinson Gallery, and also for the opportunity to speak to you today. When Sarah asked me to prepare this lecture, I thought it would be valuable to talk a little bit about my professional trajectory. Like she said, I was an illustrator for about 20 years. That dates me a little bit. And in the process, so this was a chance for me to reflect on what brought me to where I am today. And in the process, offer you some insight on why we make the decisions we make and what has brought me to where I am today. Also, on a more practical level, I will talk a little bit about different directions that an artist can take, the illustration and the fine art world. They're two different worlds, in my opinion. So this will be primarily a chronological presentation, so I'm going to start from the beginning. I was born and raised in Mexico City. I chose this image because because of the layers that it contains. It is the center of the city both physically and historically. It is where the city was first built. When you see the stones of the cathedral that you see were taken from the Mexica temple that is to the right of what you're looking at. When you are in this plaza called the Zócalo, you see three different cultures blended together: the Mexica culture, the colonial culture, and the Mexico of today. In one place, you can see how people, revolutions, demonstrations, celebrations, circumstances, time have transformed the space. This is important because transformation in general is a very important element in the work that I'm doing right now. I'm going to fast forward 24 years, which is when I moved to Pasadena to go to study Art Center after finishing a degree in graphic design, like Sarah said. There, I received skills, great deal of skills. I was able to render with acrylic, with gouache, with oil. Initially, when I started the degree, I wanted to create images that were highly photographic. This is made with acrylic, and I was making works like these. This is a self-portrait at the time. I think I was like second or third term. Don't ask, but this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to create photographic images until when I got to fourth term in the illustration department. I took a class with the chair of the illustration department. His name was Phil Hayes. He encouraged us to work with different media, and in this case, I decided to start working dimensionally. I started drawing with wire, making objects out of wood, sometimes carving with clay. In this case, this was a portrait of my great aunt, and I built the frame from scratch. Phil Hayes at the time said that my portfolio was too fine art oriented, and I was very seduced by the fact that I would see these magazines and see all these showcases of graphic artists in magazines, and I really wanted to have my work in magazines. It was, I don't know, I was just, my ego was kind of telling me, I really want that. So my teacher an upper division class. This was an advertising illustration class that I took. Joel Nakamura, he's an artist now that lives in Santa Fe, said you need to incorporate elements into your work that where art directors can relate to the work. So in this case, I put a pack of Dentyne. This was supposed to be an advertisement for Dentyne. If you chew Dentyne, you fall in love and you are forever in love. So I was making, the bow and arrow was made with clay. I built the frame from scratch. This is basically when I graduated, this is the work that I started promote, or that I promoted. Every time I make presentations with that deal with my illustration direction, I guess, I always equated my work to be play. I was like in a playground. My studio was always a playground where I was making all kinds of fun stuff. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my process. An art director would come to me with an idea, with a commission. In this case, an art director working at US News and World Report to represent to illustrate a piece on birth control. I would do like 3 to 5 sketches, usually indicating what was going to be dimensional, what was going to be drawn, what was going to be the color, and this is another option. And I was very strict in terms of indicating what the elements of the piece were going to be. This is the sketch that was approved, and you can see how it's almost identical. The sketch is almost identical to the piece that I made. This is the final product, and that was made with, again, some of those are doll arms. The head, I think the face, I found it somewhere, but I cut all the pieces out of wood and drew with wire. And this is the piece on the page of US News and World Report. Then another project, this one was for Serban Communications. Serban Communications is a publishing house here in town that they publish directories. It's like they publish yellow pages, but for graphic artists. They do one for photographers, illustrators. They have one on children's book illustrators. And the theme was Invigorate Fortune. This project has a very personal element to it because at the time that I was commissioned to do this piece, I had an accident. I cut a piece of my finger, of my left hand, of my middle finger. You can come and check it out after the lecture if you want to. And it has so I wanted to illustrate Invigorate Fortune. I decided to use a rabbit to represent fortune. And then Invigorate, I thought, well, I'll just put him on a pogo stick. But then I thought, wait a minute, rabbits already hop really well. So there's no reason for the rabbit to be on a pogo stick. So I decided, well, why don't I chop his leg off, like my finger? So that's what, these are the 2 options that I proposed. One with a bleed and another one with a frame. And unfortunately, the editor said, no, this is too gruesome. This is just not gonna work. You need to put a leg on him. So this is one of the rare occasions where the art directors, where I got art directed. Most of the time I was barely ever art directed, but in this case I was. But it's my piece. So the moment the rabbit came back home back to the studio after it had been photographed, I decided to chop his leg off. And now it holds a very special place in our house in honor of my finger. So if you multiply these 2 commissions by 321, that's my career as an illustrator, basically. So shortly after I accidentally amputated my own finger, I had enough time. I had more than enough time with power tools, so I decided to fall back in love with painting. I was painting pieces like these. This is 4 by 5 feet. They were inspired by writings of Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Jorge Luis Borges, not in specific stories, but more in the essence of the storytelling with a real element and also with a more fantastical element. If you can see here, and here, all these represent flowers that are made out of women that are in concentric circles. And bees, for me, well, they provide so much nourishment to ourselves with all the pollination. So I felt like the women in those flowers were sort of returning the favor to the bee. That was my homage to that. Then this is another piece that I did. It's also 4 by 5 feet. And this is actually the time when I decided to go back to school. I felt like when I was making these pieces, I was still illustrating, and I felt like I needed to sort of unlearn some of the, my process. I felt like I was illustrating. And I also felt stuck. I felt a little stuck. My husband would say, "Oh, just go into the studio and play with paint," and I just didn't. It was not happening. And again, those two pieces, I felt like they were too illustrative. So I was stuck until I got a call from my sister that my mother had a stroke and that I needed to go down to Mexico almost immediately because she was not going to survive. Let me see. Yeah. I was making these drawings. So when I was down, I was spending about 3 weeks at a time with my mother, caring for her, and then I would have to come back home. And these pieces were really the pieces that I did coping with my inability to be with her. They were her stroke paralyzed the left side of her body. She couldn't, and she also lost her spatial ability, and especially her ability to connect parts to wholes. So I was very intrigued by how her brain or her perception was, how she perceived the world. This piece specifically narrates an experience that I had with her, which she would say that she would beg me to please untwist her legs, that her legs were twisted. And I kept saying, no, they're straight, no, don't worry. And I would spend hours and hours trying to sort of caressing or rubbing her legs to make sure that she felt okay, but her perception was not that way. Also, when she first had her stroke, she couldn't swallow. And when we first started, when she started gaining the ability to swallow, we were feeding her with a syringe. And that's when when I would come back to Santa Barbara, that's when I started drawing with a syringe. For me, I was finding that the shortcomings of the syringe or of the tool were interesting. I was getting all kinds of interesting materials or mistakes that I was trying to embrace. The lines that are colorful, I thought, were symbolizing hope. I obviously wanted her to get well and come back home. This is one of the first pieces that I did when I was at UCSB. It's a large drawing. It's a 69 by 52 inches. Like I said, I learned so much from the unpredictability of the tool or the shortcomings of it. The needle getting plugged resulted in spurts of paint that were not under my control. And this is when I started reacting to the material that I was using. And that's very much the way that this way, or embracing the material, how the material reacts, is has informed the way I'm painting today. I see this drawing also as ritualistic and repetitive, lines, 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 and reacting again to the material's generosity. I feel like the material gave me a lot. All these little dots of paint right there, I didn't want them there, but for some reason they were happening, and they were always they were happy accidents for me. This piece is also acrylic on paper. It's 52 by 78 inches. It's a representation of a tumbleweed, also drawn with a syringe. Tumbleweeds are Russian thistles, which after they mature, flower, and dry, they break from their ground and become tumbleweeds with the wind, that the wind pushes them around. They are at this point dead, but they will spread an average of 250,000 cells. It can provide forage for cattle and sheep. In fact, during the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, it saved starving animals when no further feed was available. I continued to paint representations of tumbleweeds. I liked how fragile they seemed, yet they were incredibly enduring plants, not to mention all the nourishment they provide. In this piece, I wanted a sense of movement. I hung, each piece of paper is 18 by 24, and they are mounted away from the wall, about 1.5 inches away from the wall. So the space between the piece and the wall activates the image in a different way. It's sort of, it moves, and even when people were walking by, it moved a little bit. In the next 2 instances, I wanted to place the tumbleweed in an unusual landscape, sort of a warped landscape, and I try to achieve this with color. These are, this color you don't normally see it in nature. I felt like the colors that I was using before, the blue and the brown, were too much like nature, and it was important for me to distort nature at the time. And also areas like this and like that and like that, those were the mistakes that were happening in the piece, and I was embracing them. I'm like, okay, this is just the way it is. I was not painting them back. I wanted to embrace what the material was doing. This is also acrylic on paper. I was trying to make the space a little bit more distorted. That was my intention with these 2 pieces. But after painting all these, what I call tumbleweeds, I felt like I needed to explore the metaphor of the tumbleweed, what the tumbleweed represented, instead of keep painting the object. And I also felt like every time I was painting or I was listening to myself explain the death to life and life to death, I was sounding too melancholic and too sentimental. And that was bothering me for some reason. And so in the fall of my second year, I think the start of the second year in grad school, I decided to do a show titled Rock, Paper, Candy, which references the game Rock, Paper, Scissors. The cycle of rock blunting scissors, scissors cutting paper, paper enveloping rock echoed the tumbleweed metaphor. Death giving life, life giving death, death giving life. So I began with paintings, with putting paint down, reacting to the material, and then images like these. So in this case, like this blob of paint, I would go to the studio, paint it, and then 2 hours later it was completely different, or even the following day it was like a completely different painting. So I was really embracing what the material was giving. And also shapes like these, just to try to emphasize what the theme of the show was. I think I can do this with this. I copied this piece here. These pieces are 39 by 52 pieces of paper, acrylic on paper as well. And then this polygon appears in right here, tiny bit. And then this whole figure out of shapes, then it appears over there, obviously in different configurations. So the idea of the show was, instead of painting a tumbleweed, was all these objects were like seeds that were spreading around the show. That was my idea for the show. Let me see. In that show also, I was interested in ideas of this is, by the way that a little bit a picture of the installation, how the paintings looked. So again, I mean, and it was weird because the viewer, whoever came to see the show, didn't really see what I had in my mind. But sometimes I don't know if that's necessarily important. But this shape appeared right here, and then there was this shape that appeared right here. So there was like that seed spreading that was intrinsic in the whole show. I was also interested in ideas of perception, playing with notions of perception, and I produced this installation, which was 96 by 196 by 36 inches, in which I used branches growing from the wall, and I placed cotton candy on top of the branches. The cotton candy was a material that it changes in 3 hours. It's completely different. It changes its appearance considerably, and I also used the material in keeping with notions of transformation. In a separate room, I built a totemic, well, I had some help, a totemic sculpture that was 96, it was 8 feet tall, so it dwarfed most people, 12 by 12 and by 12 by 12, and made out of stacks of rocks, or a stack of rocks with an element of surprise. I placed a fiberglass insulation ball similar in size to the average size of the rocks, about 3/5 of the way from the bottom. When people experienced both works, particularly in this vertical balance heap of rocks, I was struck by the notion that the majority of viewers thought that the fiberglass insulation was cotton candy. It also happened because the name of the show was right to the right of the piece, and people would tell me, I feel like I want to eat your piece, or it smells like candy in here, and it didn't. It didn't. So I don't know if they were getting the candy smell from the word that they were reading, or from the other room. So the perception of the viewer was unconsciously influenced by the previous knowledge of the formal characteristics of the material, like shape, texture, and color, as well as the presence of the real cotton candy in the neighboring room. This is a detail of the other piece, the piece that you just saw on the wall, that with the cotton candy still pretty fresh. Then this is another project that I feel like it's something that I've been making since probably my first year at UCSB. It's a project that I called Unfixed. I titled it Unfixed. It has gone through many different iterations. It has mostly grown. It was first conceived thinking of notions of transformation. Again, that's why I showed you that picture in the beginning, because of the ephemeral nature of the Post-it note. The Post-it note is an unarchival paper, and also the glue fades away and the Post-it note falls. I first made 100 and I installed it in a grid like this. The notes are meant to fall, although when people saw that the Post-it notes were on the floor, some of them felt sorry for me. I actually saw somebody watching the Post-it note fall and going, I mean, really feeling sorry that I had done some mistakes. So he went, reached for the Post-it note and affixed it onto the wall. And I'm like, it's okay, it's meant to fall. Then I made another piece. I made more. This is 196 small pieces. And in this case, I was reading Henri Bergson on Matter and Memory, and he talks about how truth is an aggregate of images, or what we perceive is an aggregate of images that happen in our brain. And so I was seeing these Post-it notes as all the little thoughts that we have in our mind, and the one on the right was like the truth. And I also I spent all this time painting all these Post-it notes, and I just wanted to paint a bigger one too, and show them together. There's so much detail on the little paintings that I thought I needed to show, or make a bigger one and show it. Then it grew again. These are 324 on the right. In this case, I installed it in such a way that, I don't know if you can see it, but the left side is a little bit more pink than the right side. And also the right side has some sort of celestial bodies that are starting to happen. So I thought eventually it'd be nice to make one more horizontal and have this idea of transformation. And I painted these also in keeping with the other idea of having some larger paintings up. Firstly, because I just wanted to experiment in another, and also because I wanted the Post-it notes to be not so alone. Then this is the last iteration, of the piece, which you can see right now in the Atkinson Gallery show. It's still about transformation. I think I've hinted it a little bit more just because I put a pile of Post-it notes on the bottom to say it's okay if they fall. Don't feel like you have to fix my piece. And I see also this project as something that I do, something ritualistic, something that I do that I repeat. It's like I've done this a few times with the Post-it notes. There's a section in my studio where I make things that happen almost every day. Like I keep a journal and I paint on it every day. So it's just also a way to put paint down on paper, basically. This is a detail of that piece. Then I'd like to talk a little bit about a project that I did when I was commissioned by the Contemporary Arts Forum before. Now it's the Museum of Contemporary Art, Santa Barbara. It was in the fall of 2012. I was commissioned to develop an installation to create an experience for a reinterpretation of Day of the Dead. I altered the room in the gallery to symbolize an underground grave by painting the walls brown 6 feet from the floor and continuing with blue the rest of the wall and ceiling. 300 marigolds. Marigolds are used in Mexico to sort of bring the people, the dead, back alive. So marigolds or marigold-like flowers with roots were made out of tissue paper and hung from the ceiling, also 6 feet from the ground to connect, quote unquote, the underground with the heavens above. It was great because the meal was all root related. We had beets, we had potatoes, we had all kinds of yummy food. I was paired with Ron True from the Arlington Tavern, and it was a really wonderful evening. People were asked to bring an object that belonged to a person that they might have lost, and came prepared to share. And if they wanted to, they would share a story that was related to the person and the object. It was a very intimate and emotional evening. And also for me, it was a wonderful opportunity to develop a piece that was more installation based. I also wrote a poem. In Mexico, during the Day of the Dead, you write poems. They're called calaveritas. And they are meant to poke fun at politicians, primarily. But I didn't poke so much fun to anybody in particular. I just made it to honor rebirth. I didn't bring it. I should have brought it. But if anybody wants it, I'm would be glad to share it with you. So this is a detail of it, and that's how, it was nice because people had to duck into the room, and there's a shot of, from the flowers, from the top of the flowers down into the room with all the people eating and having fun. Now for the next few slides, I'm going to preface the next few slides by saying that I'm going to read words. You're going to look at the images, and I'm going to read the words. It's more poem-like. They're not going to be descriptive. So I'm going to try to leave enough time for you to see the work. And these words that I'm going to read relate to my thesis show and the missing rib show. So for my thesis show and the work that you can see in Missing Rib, I decided to delve into notions of how absence, omission, fractured forms, and distorted forms transform the way we perceive the world. This gray form was inspired by the form in this painting you saw before. In an effort to challenge the viewer in the way they read my paintings, I remove, sometimes through chance, and sometimes through a more deliberate action, recognizable elements within a form and graft other forms that are equally ambiguous. I see these paintings as animal, human, plant, object, merging, grafting, one becoming other, never staying the same. Constantly morphing, working with others, and making other possible worlds. A hybrid figure that with scrutiny, one might be able to recognize it as an elephant, a bird, a bison, a box, a figure. It's like a thought becoming flesh. Often the viewer becomes part of my medium because what is perceived changes depending on who is experiencing the work. That's the end of it. This wall installation is up in the gallery right now. You can see it as well. Also pay attention to this. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. I'm going to talk about volunteers, outliers, and embryos. So sometimes I have a very specific plan of idea and of what I want to do, and sometimes there's gestures in the studio that happen that inspire pieces. In this case, this piece, I was trying to, when I was making that big piece in the on the wall, the installation wall that you just saw, I was trying to get these pieces out of the way and hanging them on a nail, and just I'm like, I'm just gonna throw them away, and eventually, but I just needed them out of the way right now. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I think I can use those. So this is what I call volunteers. These pieces of paper became this piece right here that I call Dust to Dust. It's in line with the tumbleweed metaphor, the tree giving birth to paper, and the paper going back to the earth. And also it has a biblical reference, which also the title of the show, Missing Rib, has a little bit biblical reference. So I keep saying how generous the material is, I feel like in this case, to me, the cuts of paper were sort of generous. It was something that all of a sudden I was struck by it. I took a picture and then I thought, this is something that I really need to use. That's a detail of it. Again, you can see this up in the show. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about outliers. This is a piece that I did for, I exhibited in my MFA show titled Mausoleum. People might consider this an outlier because it's not a painting. It doesn't have acrylic on it. Doesn't have blobs of paint on it. And I wanted to emphasize the idea of loss and absence. So I built these boxes, and in them I put powder, colored powder, and embedded a shape of an egg. So you don't see the egg, you just see an imprint of an egg. So it's the egg is absent, or what the shape that made the imprint is no longer there. Then another outlier is this nest. It's made out of 1,500 tapestry needles. There's no glue, just friction, keeping it together. The needles are inserted into other needles, the other eye of the needle, and it's the same repetitive nature, like ritualistic action that I did with the Post-it notes. In this case, it's something that I do. Repetitive motions. And then this is a shot of what my MFA show looked like. Oh, by the way, this drawing right here, it has a nest in here. I didn't bring a detail of it, but there was a little bit of a connection. David Pagel, who writes for the LA Times, came and did a walkthrough with us, and he said, I was trying to say, oh, this connects to that, and this connects to that, and he said, it's okay if pieces in the show don't connect to each other. I think it's important to see how an artist is thinking, and they're making other objects in the studio that are completely unrelated. So he was happy to see that there were some outliers in the show. And then I'm going to talk about eggs or embryos. This is also another pieces that I'm working on. These pieces are basically about embracing the material again. I put a layer of paint down one morning, let's say. 3 hours later is completely different. So it's really wonderful I'm working on paper as well. So the warping of the paper makes some of the pigments go into different directions. And also I mix paint with different colors, and the pigments separate when the paint is drying. So they it's very hard to see, but you can see some of that in my, this is a little bit more of a practical description of the paintings. But here, I mean, this was gray paint, but you can see that it's separated into a little bit red and a little bit of blue. So it's nice to be able to embrace what the material is doing and also let it be. They are big paintings like this. This is 52 by 72 inches. This is another painting that is pretty big. It's like 72 by 52. And they could be embryos, they could be celestial bodies, they could be apples. Wait. Eggs, they could be fruits. I'm interested also in the macroscopic and the microscopic. They could be little cells inside a body or a really big celestial body. This is made on panel with two different paints, I'm using flash and acrylic for those painters in the room. And in this case, the material sort of stays on a flat surface. There's no way for the material to duck into the valleys of the paper. So since it's a very flat surface, it just stays on it. But it still does its own thing, and it's nice to be able to react to it. There's another one. This is 8 by 10. And this is also in the show. This is on paper, and then it's mounted on the panel. And this is the last slide. I'm going to leave you with a quote by Gaston Bachelard of the Poetics of Space that says, "It is better to live in a state of impermanence than in one in finality." That's it.